the second ever episode of the Pokemon anime, we meet Team Rocket. And I'll be real, this first appearance is kind of a flop for me. James's banter is mid, Jessie's laugh sounds normal, and Meowth, despite talking, doesn't say much. Which, you know, I get, because in the video game the show is based off of, Team Rocket mainly presents as a horde of interchangeable NPC grunts, wearing the same dripless black jumpsuits when they commit crimes, and generally having all the personality of a stapler. But the seed of something much more powerful has been planted here. Jessie, James, and Meowth are not going to swap out for some other guys to antagonize our heroes. They will be back next week, and the week after that. These three will appear in every episode of the first season of this show as our primary antagonists, the main bad guys, our recurring villains. And you might already know this, but things are about to get a little fruity. I've watched a lot of analysis of this phenomena, and Team Rocket is one of the most commonly cited examples when people talk about queer-coded villains. As they should be. In the first season alone, these three go from cookie-cutter bad guys to unambiguous camp royalty. They're fun, they're flamboyant, they're friends with each other. Did you know they wear at least 27 different disguises in the first season alone? You remember how they just roll up every week with a brand new, like, rubberized balloon bazooka? Or like a net cannon? Or a Gyarados submarine? Honestly, that's how I'm trying to be. That's the energy I want to bring every single day, but especially today because this video is the next part in my Lavender Town Witch series. In these videos, I've been combining taking a closer look at something I find interesting in the world of Pokemon with my work as a Build-A-Pokemon cosplay. It is an original design, but like, you're smart. I think you can understand the assignment from the phrase Lavender Town Witch. That's what we're making. And I'm gonna be real with you guys, this video is kind of a selfish one. I wanted to talk about Team Rocket now because today, I'm gonna be making that giant staff. And I'm not really a confident prop maker or foam smith. So yeah, I literally just wanted this to be the Team Rocket video so that I could siphon off their drip and pizzazz and fearlessness. I want their endless queer audacity to be the shining battery pack that will empower me to do some things that I have never done before. At least that's what I hope. But before we get started, because today's video is going to be about taking on different projects and learning something new, let me tell you about today's sponsor, Skillshare. To shoot straight with you, I have been a paying customer of Skillshare for multiple years now. My money is where my mouth is, because as a full-time creator, I genuinely rely on their classes when I want to start from scratch on something I've never done before. I've started my embroidery journey on Skillshare with Ginny Nunez. Brooke Glazer's Procreate illustration class is the only reason I understand layer blending modes. Skillshare is the largest online learning community for creatives with thousands of classes led by industry experts. There's so many categories too. You can learn about textiles and sewing, or video production, or animation. And they've just rolled out a ton of new improvements to their class system with smarter categories and new topics, including creative careers and creative inspiration, and my personal favorite, the ability to find classes based on software and material. I always get the urge to reorganize my entire life in September when the back to school vibes are in the air, and I just started Ali Abdal's Notion masterclass. My entire Notion setup is about to get overhauled, and I'm very excited. The first 500 people to use my link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Get started today and join me in learning something new this fall. Sorry, yeah, you're gonna have to do the rest of the video without me. I'm setting up my Notion right now. I'm gonna tell you all about my PVC pipe struggles soon, but first, some ground rules. This video is mainly gonna focus on the Indigo League, aka the first season of the anime. I'm also gonna use the term Team Rocket to refer to the trio and not necessarily the organization they work for. When I got started with the most cursory, starter-level research into the topic of Team Rocket and queerness, and let me not raise your expectations too high here, this is gonna be more of a vibe sesh than a video essay, I was surprised to see just how much there was online debating the specifics of their identities. Is James a gay man, or maybe trans femme? Jessie could be a lesbian, or maybe she is romantically interested in the men she uses as set dressing. And I just want to be so clear from the jump that I am not here to be their identity umpire today. I think it'd be really boring to try and make a factually perfect flowchart of every gender expression and interaction we see from them, and arrive at an empirical conclusion. To me, that's not how queerness works IRL or in fiction. You don't iron out every aspect of an existence and end up with a perfect, contradiction-free collection of terms. Self-identification is the bedrock of how I approach queerness. You get to decide who you are. It is no one else's job to police that or litigate contradictions. And to apply that to fictional characters, that means you get to decide the interpretations or headcanons that feel meaningful to you. So if you want to kiki in the comments about what Team Rocket means to you, please have fun with my blessing, but I will be very disappointed in you if you attack other people for their experiences of these characters. Please don't put fandom discourse in my comments section. Let's just have some respectful interactive fun here today. To keep the 101 section moving along, when we say that a character is coded as something, it just means that there are subtle, subtextual, contextual aspects of their portrayal that audience members interpret as representing an identity that is not explicitly confirmed. They've just got the vibes. If you know kind of thing. Sometimes this is intentional. A lot of older media especially was created in circumstances that didn't really allow for explicit representation. And queer coding is very different from queer baiting, where creators will maliciously abstain from canon representation of LGBTQ characters to try and play both sides of queer and queer-phobic fandom alike. So in theory, being queer-coded could happen to any character in the narrative, but so frequently we find that it's the bad guys. It's the characters that are breaking the rules and disrupting the status quo. It is the antagonists. And while it is much too big a job for one little crafting video to fully explore the entire society-wide connection between queerness and that which is transgressive and the history of film production and the Hays Code, I want to at least try and zoom in on what this connection means for Team Rocket. YouTubers more serious than I have looked at the real harm that in some cases can come out of this association between malicious, sadistic evil and stereotypes we associate with queerness, which is an important topic that deserves serious attention. But the point of Team Rocket is they are a deeply unserious trio. They pose a legitimate threat to our heroes for a single-digit number of episodes. Honestly, some of the only actual criticism I could find of them, hater criticism, not academic criticism, was from people who were frustrated with how predictable their failures were. They're just not that good at being bad. And I can relate. I'm pretty bad at a lot of stuff, like making cosplay props. I was gonna say more stuff about Pokemon and their track record with queerness, but I just got excited about that transition. Well, okay, it's just that there are one or two instances of queer coding in the games, but for the most part, the gameplay experience is strictly gendered and straight by default. I talk about this more in my video about Pokemon fashion design, and I also would highly recommend one of my favorite Pokemon YouTubers, Cecily, who recently made a video about this topic. Her take is that we as queer Pokemon fans are the ones who are getting our gay little hands all over this text, way more so than the games actually being queer themselves.
Most of the queerness of Pokemon comes not from Pokemon itself, but by the way that we, the community, relate to it. We made Pokemon queer. We transformed Among Us into a queer icon. We correlated Sylveon's fairy colors with the trans flag. And we looked at a software bug that changed Azuriel's gender and told ourselves it was a transition story. It is our queerness that acts as a lens when looking at these characters and sees a reflection of our individual experiences, identities, and sexualities.
And speaking of gay little hands, let's see what mine we're getting into in a very different time of year. It just started snowing. Not fun, delightful snowing, that is a wet snow. It is January right now, and the last time I worked on this staff was January, so I'm gonna catch you up today. The big thing I need this staff to do that is gonna make it such a project is that I do need it to break down for travel. I need it to be able to fit in a suitcase. So that means last year when I started this project, I bought those 2-foot sections of PVC pipe because I know those will fit in my check bag. I watched a bunch of video tutorials about how people made their props be able to break down, and the best one I found was by Kamui. Her method for doing this is to insert a wooden dowel into the hole of the PVC pipe and drill holes for magnets, and then those magnets come together and the prop comes together. I picked a slightly warmer day when it was in the 50s to jump up on my roof and start sawing the PVC pipe to size. This was kind of an ordeal. I don't really have the setup for that on my roof in Brooklyn. I eventually figured out some stuff with a cinder block, but it took some trial and error. And man, even for a warm day in January, it was still just so cold up in there. Why did I not work on this project during the nice, normal, warm months out of the year? Why am I only working on this in January? I'm about to do a crafting stream for my patrons, I'm migrating around my setup a little bit here, but here is the staff as it is today. One of the things I still need to do is get some little stabilizing, I think worbla bits in here, because if you look really closely, when you shake it, it just wobbles ever so slightly because the dowel is not quite flush with the length of the PVC pipe. The other more fun thing that I think I'm gonna... Well, there's troubleshooting to do here. Oh, one of the other things that I'm not sure if I mentioned in the video is I did kind of gorilla glue on a washer on the bottom here, or a nut or some kind of plumbing thing. So this way the bottom is a lot more weighted and it's not gonna get too top heavy, or at least it'll balance out the top heaviness. Today is the goddamn day, beloveds. It is cloudy, It is in the mid-40s, and that means it is fucking roof day. There's so few things that I'm still kind of a baby about in cosplay, but contact cement is one of them. I have lived in New York for the same amount of time that I've been cosplaying, so I've never had a garage or a yard. I've never really had a space to work with all those toxic materials that require a lot of ventilation, but right now, I do have a roof. So I'm gonna real quick cut some rectangles of 2mm EVA foam. I've got my comedically tiny little thing of contact cement. I've got my gloves because I am a hair dyeing homie, and I've just watched a lot of foam bro YouTube videos about how to use contact cement. This long stick is kind of like what the state of the work in progress has been for a year at this point, and I'm really excited to finally start actually building this staff into something more than a long stick I can take apart. So I'm not gonna lie to y'all, my attempt to wrap the PVC pipe in thin foam so I could have a more workable base was honestly a total whiff. I'm sure some of you can already guess what happened, but it turns out contact cement isn't meant to be used in temps below the 60s. So I was like 20 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 Celsius off base. Also, I'm sure I left it on too long and made other mistakes. The cement just didn't cement. I don't know if I left it too long or it's too cold, but it's kind of struggling. I think it'll be fine. There was a low but steady wind the whole time too, which is why I just didn't pop my respirator on. I actually couldn't smell the contact cement whatsoever. Not endorsing my behavior here, honestly, it still should have worn it to be a good example, but just explaining the circumstances of the airflow on a New York City roof. I wonder if it is a temperature thing, because like when I fucking grip it and rip it, I give that 5 minutes and I'm gonna start taking this stuff downstairs. So when I returned downstairs, I did some frantic Googling and wrapped my poor pipes in saran wrap and packing tape for a few days. We'll be turning them into something much more exciting soon, but first, I want to talk about something much more important. After a handful of episodes of standard cartoon hijinks, in episode 9, The School of Hard Knocks, we received the very first scrap of tangible backstory for any member of Team Rocket. We learned that Jessie and James got the worst score in history on an entrance exam to a Pokemon technical school. It's pretty funny, but it doesn't actually do a whole lot for their characterization. It's just kind of like, oh yeah, they also grew up here in this world, and they were just as comically inept then as they are now. A few dozen episodes later, our heroes meet a bike gang that it turns out Jessie and James are alumni of. Jessie seems moderately cool in the flashback, and James, we learn, was the only member of the gang who used training wheels. Now we're starting to cook with gas. Their personalities are starting to become distinct, like cats that live together and start to become stupid in different directions. The flavor of James's ineptitude is decidedly effeminate. He's not just bad at things, he's bad at things in a way that is rooted in a lack of tenacity and conviction. He's also fabulous. His aesthetic sensibility is unmatched, and leisure is often his highest goal. To make the point monosyllabically, he's camp. I hold the opinion very strongly that Susan Sontag's culture-defining essay notes on camp should have a 59th note that is just a low-res JPEG of James Team Rocket. Actually, if you've never read that essay, the part I would point to most when I say that Team Rocket, and especially James, are camp is note 38. Camp is the consciously aesthetic experience of the world. It incarnates a victory of style over content, aesthetics over morality, of irony over tragedy. If Team Rocket ever needs a replacement motto, I think this should be it. It's in episode 48, though, that we really dive deep into James's backstory. We learn here that James grew up hyper wealthy to the exaggeration level that only a kid's anime can deliver. There's a very silly plotline where James is being forced into an arranged marriage for his inheritance, and a core aspect of Team Rocket is that they are perfectly willing to be horrible to each other if the price is right. James doesn't want to go through with the arranged marriage, and maybe if Jessie and Meowth were protagonists, they would lovingly support their friend, who's following his gut and making a tough decision. But they're here to be garbage, so instead they put on Bunraku puppeteer costumes and puppet master James into going through with this. They're like, we will get this bag for bro, with or without his consent. This plotline is so stupid and it makes me laugh so hard. The sheer simplicity of the gag that Jessie and Meowth think they're invisible masterminds while everyone around them is like, I can literally see you. You are right there. The girl they're trying to trap James in marriage with is named Jezebel, and she looks just like Jessie. This is the part of the episode that doesn't quite land for me. I'm just not really sure what they're trying to say with her, because her dialogue is all about trying to get James to do things properly and conform to her expectations. But she executes this with a literal whip, and what I can only call light-hearted, PG-rated, fetish-coded violence. It's just kind of one of those things where I'm like, the stakes of her shenanigans feel so low when the trio regularly KOs each other, and I don't think her looking like Jessie heightens the contrast, it just muddies it. But even if the execution feels wonky to me, what this episode is trying to do is a really key part of why we consider Team Rocket queer-coded. James's parents want him to be normal. They want him to wear a suit and marry a woman and tick off all the boxes that people are pressured to.
Oh, James dear, we're so happy you've come back home.
And you're wearing a suit.
And perhaps most importantly, when James rejects this, it's not because he has a competing and hetero true love. It's just because he's not interested in this whole thing.
I want to do things my way, Jessie Belle!
However you interpret this, whether you see it as being gay or aro ace or any combination thereof, it undeniably makes him queer as hell. Plus, there's all the cross-dressing. Sorry, I did bury that lead because I'm just assuming you already know. James simply cannot stop wearing skirts and dresses in one of the most consistent expressions of gender nonconformity in children's media. It never stops being delightful to see these clowns roll up in the most ludicrous disguises week after week, especially because over time it doesn't feel like the punchline is the sometimes transmisogynistic man in a dress trope. The punchline is the sheer absurdity of their infinite costume budget. Logic has no place in Team Rocket's wardrobe. But maybe logic should happen sometimes in queer Audacity. I definitely should have looked up, how contact cement works before I used it. So let's see what's cooking for the next phase of crafting, because I'm about to start trying to figure out what's going on with the little dude on top of the staff. I drew a tiny guy loosely based on Agatha's cane, like a generic spiky ghost Pokemon. I'm calling it a Gengar, but let's be real, it could be a Haunter. So let's see if I can start to figure out a pattern for that somehow. I'm about to do a crafting stream for my patrons. I am going to pattern the Gengar head for this. I think that's going to be a fun thing to do on stream. The stream where I was sculpting the top of the staff went okay. I forgot that I'm bad at paper patterning. That was my plan, is that I would take some paper and figure out what shape it would be to be a little Gengar head. I forgot that I fucking suck at that. So instead what I did is I pivoted into tinfoil sculpting the thing. So one of the things I'm going to do today is actually my very first duct tape pattern. I'm gonna wrap this in saran tape and then also cover it in a layer of duct tape and draw Sharpie lines on where I think good pattern lines will be. I'll make sure to get some notches in there so I can match it back up. Since the sculpt obviously isn't perfectly symmetrical, I'm taking each side of the pattern and tracing it on paper and using my French curve to kind of find the median lines that'll work best. And I'm taping that pattern together real fast just to make sure it is workable. Baby's first saran wrap and duct tape pattern is a win for queer Audacity today. I have never felt stupider than when I was trying to figure out where the fuck I should put the lines on this pattern to, like, I don't know, maximize the amount of curvature I can get while minimizing the number of seams. I did my best. But here we've got our pieces, we've got all our little notches. I do think I'm going to use hot glue to bring this together. After the contact cement debacle, I'd rather work with what I know. I'm just gonna open all my windows and toss on my respirator when I use the heat gun. And this part is absolutely taking me multiple episodes of Star Trek to get done, but it seems like the plan is working. My next step is going to be, I think, fiddling with adding some extra spikes, because right now it's looking a little blue badgery. As I'm figuring out the spikes, I'm also going to be figuring out the eyes, because I will be cutting out little rounded triangle-y, Gengar-y eye holes on here. You'll see why very soon. It's very soon for you. I have to do all the work right now. If you've watched the other videos in this series, you know my goal here is to wear this cosplay for the first time at Katsucon, which is in February, which is really freaking soon. I know I'm not gonna have every single detail done. There's already stuff I know I'll get to later, but the staff is the last major thing. I really want to cross the finish line, so I am crunching. The problem with the fact that Katsucon is in a week and a half is that I am just doing so much and the plans are changing so constantly that whenever I turn on the camera to talk, I'm like, what was the plan last time we talked? I have no fucking idea. That's gonna have to be a problem for Editing Lizard to figure out. Hello, it's Editing Lizard. I used some of my cheaper craft foam to kind of build up a gradual slope to the top here. That part was pretty straightforward. The part that was a little trickier was figuring out absolutely jerry-rigging some foam cylinders and just, I don't know, trial and error with cement and hot glue and foam and fabric and magnets to make a support structure. I'm gonna explain why I made this complicated setup soon, but first let me just show you what it does. But as of right now, the structure is built up. Look at this beautiful Gandalf-y energy on here. You may be wondering, what's up with that funky little thing up top? I'll fucking show you. I need 2 hands for this, because we've got this and we've also got this. Take a look, drink this in, y'all. Can you believe it? Look at that, look at him go. Fucking magnets, how do they work? I'm a millennial, sue me. Being a millennial also means that the Saturday morning cartoons I watched included reruns from a few decades earlier. Cartoon Network wasn't just Dexter's Lab and Powerpuff Girls, it was also Looney Tunes and Tom and Jerry and the Flintstones and Jetsons. And the format of these shows does something really unique, especially when it comes to the villains. Of all the Hanna-Barbera reruns I watched as a kid, Scooby-Doo to me is the crown jewel of episodic storytelling. Episodic here means that a show's individual episode can stand alone and be watched without prior knowledge or continuity. For Scooby-Doo, it means the gang encounters a new monster every episode, they crack the mystery, and the cycle resets the next week. In contrast, serialized storytelling requires that you've seen what happens before and sets up what happens next. The majority of shows that have been made throughout the global history of television production are some combination of two. It's not a strict binary. Over the decades, though, the medium has definitively moved away from episodic storytelling and into more serialized narratives. The economic model of TV used to incentivize syndication and reruns, where it was better for an audience to be able to tune into an isolated episode or two. Whereas our current model, for better or worse, incentivizes streaming and binging. Each episode follows directly after the next in a solid chunk. So what does this delineation mean for our bad guys? In my video earlier this year about rewatching the anime, I talked about how the 2- and 3-parters in Pokemon were some of the very first times I encountered serialization in kids' media. But these episodes were very much the exception and not the rule. The show isn't based on a manga, and it does generally follow an Adventure of the Week format for most of its first season. Unlike Scooby-Doo, though, where we meet a new miscreant every single week, Team Rocket serves as a fixed point in the show's structure. They are the bad guys.
We're the bad guys.
And this fixed role in a mostly episodic show is how they end up being so toothless, right? Team Rocket can never meaningfully win in a way that extends beyond the bounds of a single episode. Their schemes usually end in explosive failure, blasting off again into narrative oblivion. The repetitive nature of that format is also why their schemes become so campy. They're in a constant arms race with themselves to deploy the stupidest possible plots to try and capture Pikachu. Seeing the same exact, albeit escalating shenanigans week after week in slightly different fonts could get really boring, which is why the show starts experimenting very early on, with episodes where our heroes team up with Team Rocket against a common enemy. My point is this: it's the combination of Team Rocket's flamboyance with their recurring role in virtually every weekly episode that gives them such a soothing equilibrium as queer-coded villains. In Disney movies, the queer coding of villains often comes from the way they dismiss or obstruct a hero's pursuit of true love. The protagonist needs to overcome them to achieve their heteronormative happy ending. But there is no happy ending in an episodic anime. Every week, Ash, Misty, and Brock reset to some new location with a new adventure, and Team Rocket gets to do that right alongside them. Watching the show, I found it weirdly comforting. It started to make sense to me why I loved these characters so much as a child. Because they were stone-cold weirdos who still got to exist in this world on their own terms. Working on this video, I asked my patrons what they loved about Team Rocket's queerness, and I wasn't surprised at all to see that this kind of thing is exactly what other people connected to about them too. There's a very real sense of comfort and care and consistency in the way we as an audience get to revisit this trio every week. We can check back in with the silly soft one, the wise guy ringleader, and the meanest femme you've ever met. And I want to talk about her next, but first I gotta turn this staff into something that looks like a cool gnarled tree branch and not some foam and hot glue. And I think I know how I'm gonna do that. I was scrolling through my Instagram saved posts, and I came across a few where people were just sculpting directly into foam clay. So you know, that's the task for the day, is to build up those foam clay details. I keep going to talk into these like they're my mic, but they're not. They're LEDs. I have actually never done detail work with foam clay before. I've only used it for making very small, lightweight shapes. So I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little nervous. It has a good reputation for being easy to work with. I'm just hoping that, you know, no disaster strikes. So let's go. My original plan for the staff was to use a combination of foam clay and a hot tool to cut into the EVA foam I had already attached. But the more I'm looking at other people's work and the rapidly shrinking number of days before Katsucon, I think I can just get away with foam clay. There's an old pack of like sculpting tools I almost never use that I'm whipping out for this, and I'm like keeping the clay damp as I work and getting kind of a gnarled, barky texture going. I am unbelievably happy with this, and I'm really excited especially about the fact that, like, I just don't need to do anything else. Like, I know that when I paint this, the texture on here is gonna do all the work. I've also got, as you might have seen on the edge of the frame, this little guy, which I've already dropped once, and he survived. But now the last thing I need to do tonight is I need to sculpt the last third. It is about 2 days later, so this is dry enough to handle. I think I'm gonna give it another couple of days to wait for especially the really thick parts to dry out before I prime and paint it. I realized as I was kind of working with it that the more dry or wet it is, it will behave and sculpt very differently, which obviously that makes sense. But working with it, I started to get a sense of like when it would create some very smooth lines and when there would be a lot of pulls and a lot of roughness. And while I'm waiting for that foam clay to dry, I'm gonna back you up just a little bit and start to explain why I was holding LEDs like a mic back there. Because the next part of this project, after we talk about supporting women's wrongs, is gonna be about where those are gonna go. And actually, I will tell you right now that the reason why the eyes are cut out is, of course, they're gonna be glowing. Natch. What's the point of making a staff if it doesn't glow at the top? And you know, I need access to batteries, but I also need access in case I ever need to swap these out, because like they're the cheap LED lights. One never knows when they might poop out. But boy, I hope they don't poop out between now and KatsuCon, because I don't know if I'm gonna have time to order more. Anyway, okay, I should get back to work. You get back to whatever I'm yapping about in this edit. Throughout their banter and slapstick, Jessie and James are foils for each other, so it's no surprise their backstories are too. Where James grew up in a caricature of wealth, Jessie grew up impoverished to the point of hyperbole. We first get hints of this in Snow Way Out when everyone's trapped in a blizzard and she suggests making snow rolls for a smorgasbord, like she remembers fondly from childhood. This is such a relatable moment when you think that you're sharing a fun memory and suddenly you start to realize the people you're talking to grew up in very different tax brackets.
You mean your mother actually made meals out of snow?
We had to make do.
But the episode Princess vs. Princess is the one I really want to talk about when it comes to Jessie's characterization. For this video, obviously, I've been focusing on the localized English dub and what I connect to in Jessie, James, and Meowth as a queer person. I would love to see a video about Musashi, Kojiro, and Yasu and their place in Japanese conceptualizations of queerness. I just know I'm not the person to do that analysis. It's not because I don't think it's important or interesting. I am just deeply personally unqualified to make observations about the intentions of the Japanese production team. And real talk, if you know of any articles or videos about Team Rocket's queerness from a non-American perspective, please put them in the comments. I want to read them. I mention this now because this episode is about the Japanese festival of Girls' Day, or Hinamatsuri, and a competitive rivalry that comes up between Jessie and Misty. Bringing the two girls in our otherwise male-ish main cast into the spotlight because of their girlness makes this episode fascinating to me, even though on a surface level the plot is literally just a series of Pokemon battles. Throughout the series, neither Misty nor Jessie are depicted as paragons of girlhood. They're both opinionated and bossy and prone to comedically explosive anger. Misty has a bit of an inferiority complex and fails to meet the feminine ideal of her older sisters in Cerulean City. Jessie's vanity and inflated self-image is often shot down by those around her for laughs. We do sometimes see a more caring and nurturing side to Misty, but by and large, when Misty fails to meet the standards of her gender or gets slightly dunked on by her friends, it makes her relatable and funny. When Jessie does it, we're laughing at her more so than with her. I have seen a lot of people say that there is less evidence for a queer reading of Jessie than there is for James. It's true that in the little fantasy tableaus Team Rocket makes for themselves when they scheme, she's often surrounded by some decorative bishis. That's right, I just made you hear the word bishi in 2024. With your ears. But the fact is, Jessie is also frequently depicted in tuxedos and menswear. Pokemon Fashion Flash, the first episode where we see them both cross-dressing, is unambiguously a reference to the Takarazuka Revue and their stage production of Rose of Versailles. Takarazuka is a musical theater troupe founded in 1913 and continuing to the present day that stages absolutely lavish, opulent productions with an all-female cast. Now, the company's official track record when it comes to gender norms and homophobia is deeply complicated, but for our purposes today, this seems like a pretty intentional reference to gender nonconformity for her character. I just think there's an argument to be made too that you could interpret Jessie through the lens of a femme or high femme lesbian. The origins of femme identity are firmly rooted in mid-century working-class lesbian communities, and the show has gone out of its way to establish Jessie's lower-class background. Like in this episode, both of our girlies want to win the tournament to get the Pokemon doll set. Misty only ever got hand-me-downs from her sisters, but Jessie never had dolls, period. It's the exaggeration of Jessie's femininity to the point of camp. It's the way that her femininity can be framed by the show as being too much, too over the top. It's this that makes me see her as an intentionally subversive femme rather than a woman just performing the expected roles. And I'm not trying to say this is the only acceptable interpretation of Jessie. Absolutely all headcanons are welcome here. I just want to make the point that Jessie's queer subtext is still very much present. It's just maybe not as universally surface level as James's miniskirts. Like a lot of trans people, I can see in retrospect that one of the things that really held me back from fully exploring my own gender identity earlier was the belief that I could never be anything besides my factory default. Back when I was younger and thought feminine girl was my only realistic option, I really loved Jessie a lot. Maybe I'm more of a James now. Oh my god. But when I was in high school, my junior year for Halloween, my best friend and I decided we should make Team Rocket costumes. It wasn't my first cosplay, but in a way it was something just as important. It was the first time I crafted something beyond my skill level, something that other people connected to. In a way, that really was the very first thing that set me on the path I continued on to this day that brought me here to whatever screen you're watching this on. We'll get to that after I defeat my next challenger though and figure out how I'm gonna get some thermoplastics on this staff. I've got stream in like 2 hours, and my stream task is going to be finishing up one more step of thermoplastics on this. The good people at Worbla were kind enough to send me some black worbla to work on this project, and they've been so understanding about the timeline with everything. I think I'm going to be using the black worbla to add some vines, kind of snaking around the edge here. I also am definitely going to use that black worbla to hide some of the seams here and maybe add some additional magnets. The bottom connection is still separating like a few millimeters, and I would love to get that a little bit tighter. I'm less worried about this top connection. Where is it? There it is. Gravity is going to do most of the work up here keeping this tight, but this one here might just need a little bit of extra help. Gonna wrap that up today, and then I'll see you in a few days for priming and painting. So we definitely started that part on Craft Stream. We did not wrap it up in a day. Worbla is super easy to get the hang of, but when you're using it for something like cool vines on a staff, that's still gonna take a lot of artistic decision making to make sure it looks organic and balanced. I'm also using some of Worbla's crystal art for the eyes of the staff. These are clear pellets that I'm heating up and combining with jacquard pigment in little pancakes. I've used this technique from my buddy Becca Noel so many times before. This time it's because I know this material will let the light of the LEDs through while still having a reddish pinkish color, or at least that's what I'm hoping for, man. When I got to the very top of the staff, I made a quick wire armature because I needed something to work off of so that I could build out the spiky vines. And then I just kind of took the better part of a day to create this like IRL metal band cover art. That's what it looks like to me. Like, am I wrong, or is that what it looks like? You might need to see the finished thing to know what I'm talking about. Okay, are you ready? Because I am absolutely blown away by this. This looks 12 times cooler than I could have ever conceptualized. Let me get the lights in there. Let me show you the fantasy. I'm definitely not gonna bother like mounting these in here. I'm just gonna chuck 1 to 3 of these little string light packs in there, and that's it. It took a lot of like artistic brain cells to figure out how to get the kind of sloping upwards into this explosion of roots and vines to look cool. And I think it looks cool as shit. So everyone say thank you once more to Worbla for sending along this material. This is just the kind of project that Black Worbla absolutely excels at. I'm so happy with how secure this nest is up here with all the different vines reinforcing each other. And everyone also say goodbye to this beautiful high contrast, because I am going to be priming all of this with Flexi Paint, because that's what I have on hand. I'll be honest, Katsucon is in less than a week. Yeah, hey babe, they can tell. Dear Past Lizard, it is abundantly clear that you filmed all of this in the immediate panic of crunching for Katsucon. Also, God, I wish you'd figured out those camera settings earlier. It's so grainy, babe. We're gonna get to that crafting finish line very soon, but first, there is another crunch much further back in my past that I want to tell you about. In the fall of 2007, I had just started my junior year of high school when my best friend and I had a great idea that we should totally make Team Rocket costumes for Halloween. For context, I was more of a Lord of the Rings internet forum nerd, and Justin was more of an encyclopedic knowledge of anime voice actors nerd. But most importantly, neither of us knew how to sew or craft things whatsoever. We spent weeks flying by the seat of our pants to pull these costumes together. My white skirt was hand sewn from a pair of pants I thrifted. My black gloves were Sharpied from a white pair, and our wigs were from Party City. We were crafting into these single-digit morning hours on a Tuesday the night before we wore them, and when we finally did, the hours we had spent practicing our voices for the motto and coming up with one-liners paid the fuck off, because everyone at the school was really into it. Even though this wasn't a convention, it was just Halloween in a high school, the experience of walking through a crowd in those frantic minutes in between classes and doing a whole bit when people recognized us was transcendent. We would like pretend to get recognized or spotted, or we would ask people where Pikachu was. It was a fully developed in-character improv routine by the time the 2:15 bell rang.
Hey, Twerp! That's a good magic card!
To protect the world from devastation.
To unite all peoples within our nation.
To denounce the evils of truth and love.
To extend our reach to the stars above.
Jessie.
James.
Team Rocket blasts off at the speed of light.
Surrender now or prepare to fight, fight, fight!
To this day, it's still one of my best costume memories. And I know Justin and I committed so hard to the idea of fully in-character Team Rocket because it's what they deserved. The dedication these two have when it comes to the most absurd projects is inspiring. They make me want to cook up schemes and hit my deadlines. They make me want to extend my reach to the stars above. I mentioned in a previous video that the game's player characters have a really strict gender binary, while your enemy team has costumes that are comparatively similar across genders. Players need to be able to visually identify an NPC as a bad guy quickly, and other signifiers like gender are secondary, but it creates this really funny gender trinary. Your options are like boy, girl, or evil. This idea of the secret evil third gender in the games reminds me of the way that in the anime, Team Rocket is so committed to the idea of evil that the word kind of abstracts itself to the point of absurdity. They are the bad guys. They are consistently aware of this.
We're the bad guys.
Their lives are in service to that which is dastardly and nefarious. But there is such a disconnect from the talk they talk and the walk they walk. The result is a trio of characters that do so little by way of actual harm, whose hijinks are evil in name and name alone, who are functionally our protagonists' co-workers in the sacred mission of shenanigans. There's a few more things I want to add before we wrap up, but first, I need to complete my own shenanigans and paint this staff before I shuttle out the door to Katsucon. I'll be honest, Katsucon is in less than a week. So just in case I do not have the brain cells to turn on the camera and talk to you about what I'm doing, my current plan for painting is that I'm going to use a mix that I pulled together of acrylic medium and the Jacquard antique silver for most of this wood as a base coat. For the vines, I'm planning on using, I picked up one of those like ultra matte black paints. I think hopefully having the highly matte black and the dark silver bark will be enough of a contrast. At this point, I guess I'll see you on the other side. Holy shit, this is almost done. In those final few days, over a year after I started this prop, it's true I didn't get a ton of crafting footage, but not for the reason I thought. It turned out that this paint job took a few days, working with the tiniest brushes I had to get every last little vine. But more crucially, painting with the ultra matte black paint on a surface I'd primed with black primer was one of the stupider things I've ever done. I could only work on this project in the direct sunlight, because every fucking photon got absorbed into what I was doing. I had to put the PVC pipes on my tripod light stands too, so those were out of commission. The extra magnets I hid in the vines along the lower seam helped out so much with the joint, and I stitched together a quick cuff out of leftover Not the Brave fabric to hide the top seam. I'd say my motivation for this was like equal parts, it's the laziest way to hide a seam, and also knowing that it's gonna be a better hand feel to hold fabric all day instead of foam. This was the version of the staff that made it across the finish line to Katsucon, and I'm gonna show it to you right after we wrap up some final parting thoughts on Team Rocket. So at the end of the day, Team Rocket's legacy isn't about being complicated. It's not about moral gray areas or monstrosity as a metaphor. Ultimately, they exist in the world of a children's show and the most mainstream media franchise of all time. But I believe they create something important that shines brightest in the mainstream and the frivolous and the palatable, a gateway. They're a 101 level introduction to fruity bad guys, because they are so consistently funny and smart while being stupid and theatrical to the point of ridiculousness. Kids like them. I like them. Team Rocket really belongs to us all, like Cecily said, and that means that we can see parts of our hard-won identities reflected in their flamboyant schemes. At the end of the day, this trio is about unabashed audacity, about achieving astonishing things without angst or nuance. Team Rocket is about camp, and hijinks, and purposefully low-stakes shenanigans. Is how I would end this video if I were a fucking idiot. You really thought I was going to make a video about Team Rocket without making it unnecessarily deep? You thought I could talk about Pokemon without getting a little too emotionally invested? This next part is why I wanted to make this video in the first place. We need to talk about Meowth. Episode 17, Island of the Giant Pokemon, is one of my S-rank favorites. Much of the plot consists of Ash and Team Rocket's Pokemon working together to escape the mysterious island they're stranded on. And there's a moment when they speak to the fact that their trainers are enemies, good guys and bad guys. Koffing and Ekans tell us that Pokemon can't be bad, they are morally neutral because they are always following humans. But literally, where does that put Meowth?
It can't be! My master's not around and I always seem to act like a rat.
This question goes unanswered. In episode 44, Meowth falls in love with a trainer named Cassandra. This is kind of a side plot, but it's a cute episode with Team Rocket and everyone else cheering on a skittish little bug to help it gain confidence. At the episode's conclusion, though, when Meowth thinks he's gonna stay with Cassandra and get his happily ever after, she immediately swears that she would never split up the trio. They are best friends and heroes. To add comedic insult to comedic injury, Cassandra's grandmother suggests that they use a Persian as their mascot instead, Meowth's evolved form and so often the avatar of his inadequacies. Persian shows us everything that Meowth could be and have if he were just a little bit better. Just a little more normal. Episode 50, Who Gets to Keep Togepi, was one of the only episodes that low-key bummed me out when I watched it. Meowth takes very tender care of an egg, and yet when the little baby hatches, everyone else wants to keep it. Ultimately, Meowth loses the Pokemon Battle tournament, and we learn the baby imprinted on Misty anyway. It's giving might makes right. Unlike Jessie or James, who tend to fail because of their own hubris or stupidity, Meowth fails because of bad luck and coincidence. It's the narrative that can't let his villainy succeed, not a proportionate result of his own actions. There are hundreds and hundreds of Pokemon in this anime, but there is only one Meowth. He's a full member of Team Rocket, on par with the two humans. He's their frazzled, wisecracking ringleader, who's capable of schemes and quips and virtually everything else they are. And he can fully talk, which is huge, but not nearly as huge as the fact that when he spoke for so many kids in the 90s, it was the first trans person we had ever heard. I'm sure so many of you were already typing this in the comments, but in episode 31, Nathan Price made his final appearance as the original VA for Team Rocket's Meowth in the dub, and from there through about 2005, he would be voiced by Maddie Blaustein, an intersex trans woman. I've been hyperbolizing a lot in this video to hang out and have fun, but to be honest, I find Maddie's real-life story deeply moving. I can't imagine the conviction it took to socially transition and live an out life in that era. I've spent hours chasing down old blog posts and interviews with her, just for me, not even for this video, and I'll link as many as I can in the description, because it's such an unspeakably beautiful thing to learn that there are real trans people behind the trans narratives I experienced in childhood. So let's talk about that. Because episode 70, Go West Young Meowth, is one of the greatest episodes this show has ever made, and a trans metaphor. And I'm not open to other opinions on either of those. This is the Meowth backstory episode. The central conceit here is a pastiche of film noir flashbacks. Our heroes and Team Rocket head to Hollywood for a movie premiere, and Meowth takes the opportunity to put on a dramatic trench coat and remember a time when he was younger and hungrier and fit in a neater box as just another Pokemon. I know they're being silly here by making it about snacks, but I can't help but think about how, as queer people, we don't always have the luxury of seeing ourselves in our real everyday lives. We have to find the kernels of truth buried within us by looking at screens, and in fiction, which is where Meowth finds his truth. Meowth goes to Hollywood and joins up with a gang of street Meowths and a Persian. One day he sees a beautiful girl Meowth named Meowsy and falls in unrequited love. Yearning is inherently trans, and I should put that on a t-shirt. At first, the infatuation seems to be class-focused. Meowsy and her owner are wealthy, and Meowth comes from the streets. But instead, a much weirder conclusion gets drawn. When she rejects our Meowth, she does so because Meowth can't do anything for her as a mere Pokemon. And hearing this, Meowth decides to do something drastic. He decides to make himself a human. The montage of Meowth secreting away this knowledge, trying to make himself a perfect facsimile of humanness in spite of his quadrupedal limitations, makes me want to light myself on fire. He teaches himself to walk and talk and sing, and it is deeply tender.
H for happy, M for marriage.
Meowth is internalizing a narrative so many of us have at one point or another, that if you can just pass well enough, if you can just be normal in one direction or another, the people that used to shut the door in your face will welcome you in. You can assimilate. This is what Meowth believes will happen, but instead when he presents himself to Meowsy, she rejects him. She says he's even worse than before because now he is an aberration. He is not Pokemon enough, and he is not human enough. He has achieved the worst of all possible worlds. I know this is still a kid's show and this is all played with the lighthearted tone tag, but it makes me want to throw myself in the ocean. It's so real. Meowth leaves town. He vows to become the richest freak in the world, which is a blessing I wish upon every trans person ever. When he returns in the present-day timeline of the episode, he's in a position to enact what he always wanted to fulfill the role of the masculine protector of Meowsy and also the human who has the agency to take a Pokemon out of a bad situation like the one she's in. Jessie and James emerge to back up their buddy in combat and also sing a song, "Take note, allies, this is how you should be doing it." Meowth defeats the Persian, so he should get the happy ending he earned. But we're 18 minutes into our 21-minute episode this week, and as we established, the return to cartoon equilibrium will always win out. Meowsy goes back to the Persian. She says she will never be with Meowth because he is still a freak. Meowth may not cross-dress throughout the series in the same way that Jessie and James do, but it's because he doesn't need to. Man and woman isn't the binary he's caught between, it is human and non-human. And this story tells us that while we may have a lot of laughs with Meowth, this little guy will forever be trapped between these two identities because of the choices he made. The episode ends with this devastating playout.
I wonder what Meowth is thinking as he gazes at the night sky.
Well, maybe Meowsy's looking at the moon, too.
So maybe we don't get happily ever afters and tidy endings as queer people, but what we can get might be the next best thing, a chance to see what happens next week. The next time we see Meowth after this moment that breaks my heart, he's using a remote control to fast forward Team Rocket through the motto while they are both dressed up like Moses. They're back to their usual shenanigans as a trio. The real world is always going to be full of real people like Meowsy and the Persian. Maybe that's why the most important thing I get looking at Team Rocket, whether it's their usual slapstick nonsense or that rare episode that actually cuts deep, is how important it is to find your crew of weirdos and losers and stick together.
We can steal more badges and be rottener as a team than we can as individuals.
All right.
Revisiting the characters and cartoons you loved as a kid who'd one day grow into a queer adult can be a real mixed bag. The more time I spent with this show and these three idiots, though, the more I started to realize that they're the exception to that. There was just something really special cooking with them. And taking the time to really think through why they meant so much to so many of us has only left me feeling more connected than ever to their melodrama and camp and friendship, and the way that's fueled so much of what I still do today. I mean, come on, man. I literally make dress-up costumes on the internet. There's nothing more Team Rocket coded than that. They live within me, and therefore all of you watching. And none of this would be possible without them. I brought the finished staff to Katsucon, where I debuted the first version of this costume, and I high-key can't believe I made this. I really can't. I don't know if I'll ever be a confident prop maker, but I'm glad the Queer Audacity has won the Pokemon battle this time. I really had so much fun making this video, and I hope you had fun watching it. If you did, a like and a thoughtful comment really help it reach more eyes. The thoughtfulness is just for me, because I like to read that. This is not the final episode of the Lavender Town Witch series. I truly hope you subscribe to see what's coming next. My partner has an Etsy where they sell handmade ears like this, and they whip these out in like a night when I ask them about it. So thank you to them for these. And of course, this would not be possible without my patrons. The last week before con, when I was literally just like in a crunch fever state, because I was actively posting on there. I was posting like, I think solidly once a day, being like, this is done. Here's this thing I'm working on. I'm gonna be doing this next. I don't know if I'm gonna have time for this, but that means I'm gonna work on this. And it meant so much to have people on there like cheering me on and hoping that this all turned out well. That last week of Con Crunch was the most fun I've had crunching in a really long time. And a special thank you today, of course, to Camille Mack Harris, Grace Lilly, Analic, Phantom Angel 1245, Simrel Adoilable, Megan Von Ackerman, Turson, Maggie Holden, Larzard, Arden Winner, Kfry84, and Eli. Thank you so much to Ariane Librecht, Lulu Rush Cosplay, Stephanie C. and Hust, and a huge thank you to Toria, Thomas Drury Wang, and Nami Sparrow. Cannot believe I almost forgot to tell you. So my high school best friend, my original partner in Costume Crimes, you heard how good his James voice was. And if he sounded a little bit familiar, it might be because it might not be the first time you've heard Justin's voice. Justin really wanted to be a voice actor in high school, and he is living proof that sometimes through the power of Team Rocket, you really can blast off at the speed of light. He is the voice actor now. That's just a fun fact. I think it's really cool that my high school best friend is the king of anime these days. It's an important part of our culture, so don't let your memes be dreams, kids. There is nothing you can't achieve without the power of Team Rocket. Gonna take that energy straight back to my craft room. See you soon.